Here at 84-year-old Kamuning Bakery Cafe, we have a very interesting and important topic to discuss with our intellectuals and analysts here. The topic is assessing President Bongbong Marcos' state visit to China just this week and what impact on the Philippine future, economic, geopolitics, development future. Our panelists here, I will introduce them. This is not according to age or anything. Mr. Sixto Benedicto, here on my right, is the newly elected president of Association for Philippines-China Understanding, or APCU. It's one of the most respected NGOs in the Philippines, promoting better cooperation and understanding between the Philippines and China. Started in the 70s before diplomatic relations were even officially open. And then nandun sa extreme right, on the right side muna, as reactor to this forum, Mr. Herman Laurel. He is the president of the Asian Century Philippine Strategic Studies, Inc., a nationalist progressive think tank. And then to his right is Mr. Aaron Jed Rabena, fellow of Asia Pacific Pathways for Progress Foundation. He is a very distinguished analyst of diplomacy and geopolitics. On the extreme right is Professor Anna Malindog-Uy, External Vice President of Asian Century Philippine Strategic Studies, Inc., also an analyst of geopolitics and politics, also a very prolific columnist. Let us start by requesting, I will call upon each one to give their opening statement, assessing the state visit of President Bongbong Marcos. We'll start with the tallest speaker beside me, and very distinguished, not only physically tall, but intellect magaling din. Respected industrialist, businessman, from a family of philanthropists also. By the way, for backgrounder lang, aside from himself and his father, very respected civic leaders, Mr. Sixto Benedicto's father was also one of the best former Philippine ambassadors to Beijing. That's my uncle. That's your uncle? Oh yes, his uncle is one of the most distinguished former Philippine ambassadors to Beijing. President of APCU, Mr. Sixto Benedicto, would like to invite you to give your opening statement.
Okay, thank you, Wilson. Yeah. Friends and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, to our media friends, a pleasant morning to all. First, I would like to thank the Asian Century Philippine Strategic Studies Institute in cooperation with Pandesal Forum of Kamuning Bakery Cafe for inviting me to this hybrid forum with the topic assessing President BBM's state visit to China and impact on Philippine-China relations and future. It is indeed a matter of great importance to share our perspective and views on the recently very successful three-day state visit of President Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr. to the People's Republic of China. Before I start my short opening statement, let me congratulate PBBM for the overwhelming success of his visit to the most vital economic partner of the Philippines, the People's Republic of China, and the Chinese people. I do not doubt that the state visit of President Marcos Jr. to China and his bilateral meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping were very successful. I am optimistic that through this visit of President Marcos to China, the diplomatic and bilateral relations between the Philippines and China under his administration will be fruitful, vibrant, and bright. This visit is also significant for it will define the posture and trajectory of the Philippine-China bilateral relation in the next 5 years under the presidency of Marcos Jr. With this state visit, I believe that the relations between the two countries, both state to state and people to people, will be strengthened and deepened further. And more economic and trade cooperation between the two countries will be established and pursued. Good morning, Sir Henry. That will benefit the people of the Philippines and China. I'm positive as well that the relationship and friendship shared by both countries will flourish more and bring forth tangible benefits to the people of both countries. Just to note, the Chinese investors have committed $22.8 billion in investment pledges after President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. met them during his state visit to China. These investments commitments includes $1.72 billion for agribusiness, $13.76 billion for renewable energy, $7.32 billion for strategic monitoring. These are electric vehicles, like mineral processing. These are indeed great news for the Philippines. On other note, 14 bilateral agreements were signed between the Philippines and China. Another significant success of President Marcos' visit to China. Indeed, looking ahead, I am optimistic that through the visit of President Marcos to China, the diplomatic and bilateral relation between the Philippines and China will be fruitful, vibrant, and bright under the Marcos Jr. administration. And we in the Association for Philippine-China Understanding will do our part in further strengthening the ties and bond between the Philippines and China. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you very much to the newly elected President of Association for Philippine-China Understanding, or APCU, President Mr. Sixto Benedicto, for your opening statement. By the way, the Chairman Emeritus of APCU, former President Loya Macapagal Arroyo, was also a very important part of the Philippine delegation during the President Bongbong Marcos state visit to China. Would like to welcome the President of the Federation of Filipino-Chinese Chambers of Commerce and Industry, Inc., FFCCCII President, also a well-known industrialist, respected philanthropist, but now more well-known as the pioneer of Philippine hybrid rice technology, Dr. Henry Lim Bon Liong, to give his opening statement today here about the state visit of President Bongbong Marcos, representing the business community. Welcome, Dr. Lim.
Thank you so much, Wilson. Thank you for that very kind introduction. Good morning, everybody. Of course, a very capable moderator, Wilson Flores, and our FFCCCII board member and chairman of our Media and Public Information Committee, my fellow panelists, our friends in media, a pleasant good morning and a happy Three Kings to all. The state visit of President Bongbong Marcos to China was successful in several ways as it reaffirmed the enduring bilateral ties between the Philippines and China. And it established good interactions between President Marcos and Chinese leaders, President Xi Jinping, President Li Keqiang of the State Council, Premier Li Keqiang of the State Council, and Chairman Yi Jiangsu of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress. We greatly, of course, appreciate the initiatives of both sides to render stronger support to each other. regarding our national development goals through a comprehensive strategic cooperation. The state visit was another important milestone in the bilateral relations, as it was the parents of President Bongbong Marcos who pioneered opening official diplomatic relations between Manila and Beijing way back in 1975. Bringing Philippine-China relations to a higher level is an impetus for the future development of our two countries. The state visit opened the doors of opportunities to further strengthen the Philippines' economic ties with China, which is our country's #1 trading partner, a major investment partner, export market, and import suppliers. Both sides agreed to further increase our trade to return and even surpass the pre-pandemic bilateral trade volume. Aside from the 14 bilateral agreements signed by the Philippines and Chinese government during the state visit that cover agriculture, infrastructures, and of course the development, cooperation, maritime securities, tourism, trade, and customs, numerous agreements between the business sectors were also signed. And we are glad to hear the news that President Bongbong Marcos' meeting with Chinese businessmen during the visit yielded a 22.8 billion in investment pledges in renewable energy, electric vehicles, mineral processing, and agribusiness. Chinese companies have also expressed their intent to invest in coconut, durian production, and the livestock market. Such investment will create more jobs for our fellow Filipinos, enhance trade, and support the country's food security program. A highlight of the visit is our cooperation in agriculture, including the signing of the Action Plan in Agriculture and Fisheries Cooperation from 2023 to 2025. The Sino-Philippine Center for Agriculture Technology Technical Cooperation Program, which has been here for many years, the protocol for export of fresh durian from the Philippines. If I'm not mistaken, Thailand is the world's biggest exporter of durian. Thailand exported around $4 billion of durian every year. I think we can really learn from the Thais. Since China is the world's #2 biggest economy and the world's #1 biggest consumer market, this is a huge market that we can tap for our Philippine fruits and other produce. China has been buying a lot of Philippine bananas. In fact, I'm also exporting bananas to China. And we have an open PO from the Chinese customer. They'll give you 2,000 containers, in which is very difficult to fill up in 2 months' time. But that's how big the market is. In infrastructure, prospects abound for us to strengthen our cooperation under the China Belt and Road Initiative and the Philippines Build Better, More infrastructure program. In the coming years, we hope that there will be more infrastructure projects to spur economic development in all the regions of our country. On energy, China is already leading in the field of renewable energy, including its technology and production, and both sides agreed to explore the cooperation in solar power, wind energy, electric vehicles, and nuclear energy for electricity generations. Likewise, as both sides agreed to resume discussion on oil and gas development, we have high hopes that there will be a progress in possible joint oil and gas exploration in the seas that shall benefit both our people. The main highlight of the state visit is to resolve on both sides to improve the trust by citing the importance of bilateral consultation on the West Philippine Seas and South China Seas. Thus, we welcome the establishment of a direct communications mechanism between the Department of Boundary and Ocean Affairs of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China and the Maritime and Ocean Affairs of our Department of Foreign Affairs. Other areas of cooperation are in the field of scientific and technological innovations, defense and security, such as the convening of a joint Coast Guard Committee and the annual defense security talks, and many others. The state visit of President Marcos to China is a reaffirmation of the Philippines' sincerity in strengthening our ties and partnership with our neighbor China. Aside from the and aside from the high productive level of exchanges that transpired, it is also opened new lines of communication between our two countries, which we hope will be enhanced further to build a better understanding and goodwill. On our part, we at the Federation Filipino Chinese Chamber of Commerce and Industry, FFCCCII, shall continue to serve as a bridge in promoting business linkages and friendship among our Chinese and Filipino brothers and sisters for the mutual benefit of our people. Again, thank you and a pleasant good morning.
Thank you very much, Dr. Henry Lim Bon Liong, President of FFCCCII and Agriculture Industry Leader, for giving us an overview of the economic and trade benefits of the successful state visit of President Bongbong Marcos. Next, we'd like to invite Ms. Anna Malindog-Uy, an intellectual geopolitics expert, External Vice President of the Asian Century Philippine Strategic Studies, Inc., to give us her opening statement.
Okay, thank you, Wilson, for that very generous introduction. Friends in media, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, a pleasant afternoon to all. I think I'll just have a very brief opening statement for this forum. I think one thing that I could say that the state visit, again, of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. to China was a very successful one. Successful in a sense that to a greater extent, we got like around 22 point something billion pledges, but these are pledges still. No, we need to wait until it materializes in actual terms. And also we had, I think the two countries on the two sides were able to sign 14 bilateral agreements. I think that's very, very important. And I would also say that the recent visit of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is a very historical one, precisely because if we know, if we remember, it's his father that actually was instrumental in the establishment of the official diplomatic ties between the two countries in 1975. But I think it's good to take note of the noteworthy gains or notable gains of the recent trip, aside from the economic side. I think one aspect of that is the political gains that the trip generated. And I think one of that would be in the political front, it is noteworthy that President Marcos emphasized to President Xi Jinping that his administration intends to pursue an independent foreign policy. I think this is very important because it clears out the air, no? That indeed the Philippines is pursuing an independent foreign policy and to stop speculation that the Philippines is pivoting to the United States. I think this is very, very important for the Philippines and for, of course, for the Philippine-China relation. The second one, I think, is the two of the most critical points, political gains of President Marcos' visit to China is China's President Xi Jinping promise and pronouncement to find a solution and compromise to protect the livelihood of Filipino fishermen and avoid any misunderstanding. Because in his bilateral talks with President Xi, I think President Marcos brought up the Filipino fishermen's plight in the disputed South China Sea or the West Philippine Sea. And another one, I think, is the equally important gain on political front that has something to do with the agreement between the two sides to move forward on an agreement for the establishment of a direct communication lines or mechanism on maritime issues between the Department of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines and also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China to avoid any possible mistakes and misunderstanding that could trigger a bigger problem than the existing status quo. So this is, I think in the political front, these are very important gains. And another thing I think that's very important in the visit is also the agreement, or to a certain extent like an MOU, that the Philippines signified its interest in the Belt and Road Initiative. Is very, very successful. And I mean, the Belt and Road Initiative is a very successful project of China. And another one, I think, is the participation or the openness of the Philippine government to have a negotiation, a continuing talks and negotiation on the possible joint gas and oil exploration in the Reed Bank in the disputed waters of the South China Sea. I think these are very important gains of the visit, and I hope that in the coming days, in the coming months, that we will see and this kind of agreements will bear fruits that will benefit both countries and both peoples. And I think when you talk about Philippine-China relation, I can see that under President Marcos Jr. Administration, probably, or I'm positive and optimistic that this will signal the golden age of Philippine-China relation. During the time of President Digong, it was like a renaissance, no, of Philippine-China relation. But this time around, I think we will reap the benefits of that renaissance, and it will usher in the so-called golden age of Philippine-China relation. Thank you very much. And yes, we'll just wait later for more discussion about the different issues and different gains of the recent visit of PBBM. I would like also to congratulate the Philippine delegation, especially the president of this country, for a very successful visit, and of course the Chinese government for that very grand welcome. And I hope that the relationship of the two countries will bear fruits and will continue to deepen, and mutual trust and cooperation, especially in the economic front and in tourism industry, will be shown, no, in the matter of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ana Malindog-Uy, for your overview of the visit's geopolitics, economics perspective. By the way, I forgot to mention in the introduction, Ms. Ana Malindog-Uy is a very diligent former student of Professor Alex Magno here, top political and geopolitics analyst. Kaya matalino si Ms. Malindog-Uy dahil kay Professor Alex Magno. One of the reasons now. Next, we'd like to invite to give an opening statement, also an intellectual geopolitics analyst, Mr. Aaron Jed Rabena. He is a fellow of the Asia Pacific Pathways for Progress Foundation.
Thank you very much, Sir Henry, and to my co-panelists, Sir Wilson and Sir Henry, Sir Sixto, Sir Herman, and Miss Ana, and to friends from the media, good morning. So my take po, no, on the recent visit of President Marcos is that clearly President Marcos is living up to his promise. In the early days of his presidency, he said that he will continue President Duterte's independent foreign policy. And to President Marcos specifically, he called it friends to all and enemies to none. But aside from continuing President Duterte's foreign policy, apart from seeing a lot of continuities in the China policy, in the foreign policy aspect, we see that there's also a personal and historical element to this visit. Personal because, as Ms. Ana said, it was Marcos Sr. who normalized and opened our ties with the People's Republic. And yeah, both personal and historical, it's because of that. And this also comes at a proper time because there have been growing skepticism amongst policy circles in China that President Marcos is said to be tilting towards, you know, the U.S. and the U.S. orbit. So now this visit reaffirms the importance that he attaches to our relations with China, to recognize China's profile as a great power. And so I think that we are seeing a deepening and a continuity in our comprehensive strategic cooperation with China. Signs of continuity because, as previously mentioned, we reaffirmed our membership to the Belt and Road Initiative, and we agreed to resume a bilateral mechanism between our Coast Guards, particularly it's called the Joint Coast Guard Committee. And so I'd say that the visit is important in two ways. Strategically, it's important because, as we all know, China is our rival claimant in the South China Sea or West Philippine Sea. And so President Marcos wants to see to it that tensions would not escalate in the area. We want a stable relationship with China, and we also want a stable neighborhood. Second, it's pragmatic because I think President Marcos wants to maximize, our relations with China as a, wants to maximize relations with China as an economic and development partner. During the visit, I believe President Marcos said that there was an investment pledge of to the tune of $21 billion. So again, this will fit in to his 8-point socioeconomic agenda. And there were many agreements signed with respect to food security, agriculture, and also and other aspects. And so more broadly, I think what we're seeing is that President Marcos is trying to maintain a delicate balancing act in his foreign policy. So as Ms. Ana said, we are making our golden relations more golden. But China's relations with ASEAN, if you would look at it, China wants to upgrade the relations with ASEAN from a golden age to a diamond age. So maybe we can also follow that format in our bilateral ties with China from a golden age to a diamond age as well. So those are my initial take. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting and very nice words. Congratulating the Philippines and our president from golden age to diamond age. That's very nice way to describe it. Last but not the least, we have a reactor to all the opening statements before we go to the media questions. We have a lot of questions already. Please keep on texting me or the chat box or the... next, we'd like to invite Mr. Herman Laurel. He is a nationalist intellectual, a progressive geopolitics, history and politics analyst, and now president of the Asian Century Philippine Strategic Studies, Inc. Let us invite him to give his reaction. Mr. Herman Laurel.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. Loud and clear ba? Yes. Loud and clear.
You can make it clearer pa. Louder konti. Baka may isang microphone louder.
Yeah, this one is better.
Yes, to be sure.
I am reminded by
Yes.
our colleague here, Professor Ana Malindog-Uy, to announce that the Manila Times is our official media partner.
Yes, covering this entire session.
Event. And I'm the last speaker because I'm reacting to all the
Yes.
presentations made. Some I've reviewed, others of course were impromptu, but it does not detract from what I prepared. So what is the impact of the PBBM state visit to China? After observing the spectacular welcome President Xi Jinping staged for President Bongbong Marcos Jr. as its first state witness, or China's first state witness in 2023, with the clear purpose of showing the Filipino people and the world the utmost priority China is giving the Philippines among its relations in the global community. And after witnessing the unmistakable intention of President Bongbong Marcos Jr. of making China as his administration's first foreign official state visit outside of ASEAN, that is to put relations with the People's Republic of China, the primus inter pares among nations of Asia, as his top foreign relations focus. President Bongbong Marcos Jr. has now shown his firm resolution to continue the constitutional, quote, independent foreign policy, unquote, principle and practice reincarnated by his predecessor, President Rodrigo R. Duterte, pursued by PBBM, President Bongbong Marcos's father, the late President Ferdinand Edrelin Marcos, and prescribed by the First Philippine Republic's first Foreign Minister, Apolinario Mabini. PBBM's historic first state visit outside of ASEAN to China also gave due respect not only to ASEAN centrality, but also to the Asian centrality, carrying forward the Asian moment that was 2022, that culminated in 3 global summits held in ASEAN and Asia in November of that year. The PBBM now resumes, President Bongbong Marcos now resumes in 2023 with a visit to China. This visit was another historic step in the march of the Philippines towards the Asian century and into the vision of a world of, quote, forever peace and prosperity, unquote, and away from 500 years of, quote, forever wars, unquote, that the West brought to Asia and the world. Now, in the spirit of the, quote, strongest partnership, unquote, the Philippines can truly build its new society of prosperity in a region of harmony and stability. The remaining question, as President Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr. returns to the Philippines is, quoting myself, what actions will President Bongbong Marcos Jr. take to fulfill the rich symbolisms of his state visit to China, unquote. There are bold moves to make to normalize the historic symbolisms, such as, these are the moves that I prescribe. Number 1, ending the dalliances with the Western imperialist powers. Mr. Congeniality should end here. Ending the sabotage of the Philippines' economic, political, and geopolitical blossoming by the West's fifth column in Philippine polity. The full and uninterrupted commitment to the, quote, comprehensive strategic cooperation, unquote, with the engine of development of the world, that is China. Solidarity with ASEAN, the ASEAN majority, to exclude outside powers from the South China Sea. All these will begin with the fast-tracking of the Philippine-China 60-40 oil-gas joint venture, which is only being held back by the monumental obstructionism of a Western-led transnational oil consortium, as well as the disciplining of the foreign affairs and security bureaucracies of the Philippines from diverging from official government foreign policies. Thank you very much, but I'd just like to ad-lib. In all our discussions of foreign relations, there is a big elephant and a small elephant in the room. That is because we are trying to be polite, we frequently omit to mention, and that is the United States of America and the fifth column, the boys, the American boys within our community. And for the past 10 years, they have engaged in an information war, information campaign against our relations with China. And I think this, again, is an action I hope President Bongbong Marcos will take to end all this disinformation once and for all. I think in the past 10 years, our true patriots who are promoting and cultivating the best of relations with China, the comprehensive strategic cooperation with China, have achieved a lot with the efforts of China also in the international media. There are at least two scientific surveys, one international and one domestic, that have shown that the good China is now being perceived by at least 52 to 3% of our population. And so this just has to be pursued. The facts and the truth just has to be pursued. So there's much more to discuss, but I'd like to present more specifics if there are questions directed. So I can distribute this now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Mr. Herman Laurel, President of Asian Century Philippine Strategic Studies, Inc., for his reaction to the opening statements and the state visit. We're opening the floor for questions by our media friends. Please just indicate if you wish to ask. We have some questions all the way from Davao City. Distinguished columnist is asking. 1 second, I'll read. Ang tanong ni Mr. Jun Ledesma here. Mr. Jun Ledesma, a columnist based in Davao City, watching us via Zoom and via Facebook Live. Question. Can you all here discuss the subject of agriculture? Can you update us about agriculture cooperation? Any one of you here, your views about Philippines-China agriculture cooperation? He is particularly also interested, wants to ask or suggest, was the issue of purchasing fertilizers from China mentioned? Because Mr. Jun Ledesma of Davao said China is the world's biggest producer of fertilizer. We did not know that. Anyone here among our panelists would like to comment about the issue of agriculture cooperation? Dr. Henry Lim Bon Liong mentioned, I was surprised. I think President Bongbong Marcos mentioned that in Beijing also. China opened the doors for Philippine durian exports from Mindanao. Right now, the biggest exporter to China is Thailand. Sabi ni Dr. Henry Lim Bon Liong and sabi ni President Bongbong Marcos, that's $4 billion worth of durian export from Thailand alone. Any comments from our panelists here? Agriculture cooperation. From fruits, bananas. Dr. Lim also exports bananas and also rice.
Yes, Wilson. I think there are intentions of the Chinese investors coming here to help in putting up durian plantations. No, I think our durian is not really enough to export to China. But before China opened the durian market to the Philippines, there have been durian exporters in the Philippines exporting our durian to Thailand. In Thailand, we package it and ship it to China. No? So right now, we can ship durian directly to China, but we still have to build up our inventories. No? And I hope that we can have a lot of durian plantations in the future so that we can satisfy the demands of China. And again, there are still many other fruits, no, and agricultural products that have not been opened to the Philippines.
Wow.
One of them is, of course, rice, no? Many will be wondering, we are importing rice. Can we export our rice? You should remember around more than 15 years ago, I joined a export forum to China in Guangxi. And I brought in 1,500 kilos of rice. I was able to sell the rice in 3 hours' time now, at a very high price now, of more than 120 pesos per kilo. And I was being bombarded by a lot of Chinese importers of rice, that if I can export my rice to China, and that would be around $1,200 per metric ton. But because at that time China has no quarantine protocols on rice with the Philippines, so we cannot export our rice to the Philippines. So according to the Chinese embassy, if I'm not mistaken, that the end of this quarter, China will open up already the quarantine protocol for rice. Maybe you can start exporting our rice to China. And mind you, our Philippine government, they will allow you to export rice as long as the price is at a very fancy high price now, like $1,200. If we are importing rice at $400 and if we are exporting at $1,200, so there's really a gain. So for every tons of rice that you be exporting, we can import 3 tons of rice. So this is what we are looking at in the future, and I hope that the quarantine protocol for rice will be lifted, and our farmers will be able to plant more Doña Maria rice for us to export to China. And this will really add up now to our trade relations and our coffers with the government. And there are also a lot of things also I was mentioning about bananas, that China will give you an open PO for bananas. And we are actually the biggest exporter of banana to China at one time, but I think Ecuador was able also to export a lot of bananas to China. But Philippines against Ecuador, we are nearer China, so it's easier for us. And the freight will be cheaper. So I think they prefer to import banana from the Philippines. And aside from that, of course, we have mangoes, we have pineapples, and we have many other things. So let us explore all of these possibilities for Philippine agriculture. There's really a very good export market, and there's a very good future for Philippine agriculture.
Thank you very much, Dr. Henry Lis. And even banana exports, that's good news. Yes, Ms. Ana Malindog-Uy would like to answer the question of Mr. Jun Ledesma of Davao. By the way, I forgot to mention, he is a columnist of the Daily Tribune, Sunstar newspaper, also Sunstar newspaper of Cagayan de Oro and Davao, plus Philippine News Agency. Yes,
Okay.
Ms. Ana Malindog-Uy.
Thank you for the question from Sir Jun Ledesma. He's a good friend also and a very keen observer of Philippine-China relation. From what I know and from, if I can recall, our kind of conversation with the Chinese embassy, even before the start of the term of President Marcos Jr., because there was there was that kind of dialogue between columnist and media practitioner and also with the Chinese embassy, I think, and they were soliciting what are the important aspect of Philippine economy that probably China will be able to help. And one of that was identified in that dialogue with the media people was actually agriculture. So I think the fertilizer, like giving us cheap or providing us cheap agriculture inputs, and one of that will be fertilizer, is already part of that kind of agricultural cooperation between the two countries. And I think just to take note and to mention, actually we already have an existing Philippine-Sino Center for Agricultural Technology, Technological Cooperation, and we are already on phase 3 of this, and it's actually operating now, and it's, I think, located in some parts of northern Luzon. So I think that is already embedded in there when you talk about agricultural inputs. That's from what I know. I'm not sure as to the details of that in terms of the number of tons of agricultural inputs that's being provided to us, but I think that's one of the areas of cooperation that China will be helping us and in order for our agricultural sector to be more developed, and probably for us to have more produce. So that's my response to the question of Mr. Jun Ledesma. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Ana Malindog-Uy, for your answer, and also to Dr. Henry Lim Bon Liong. Mr. Mentong Laurel, about agriculture.
Mr. Serafin Ledesma
Yes.
is my publisher also.
That's why.
Contributions to Mindanao Journal, the newspaper in
Mr.
Mindanao.
Serafin Jun Ledesma, yes.
Yeah, I'd like to confirm that the meeting we had with Ambassador Huang Xilian, and we discussed the special attention China was giving to the fertilizer crisis that the Philippines is facing. I recall that there was a fertilizer donation that was discussed, and a special rate for fertilizer imports to the Philippines from China. So I'm sure this is part of the discussions, but again, I don't know if I'm throwing a fly into the ointment again. We would like to remind the Office of the President that their staffing work has been very poor. This is a major concern of the Philippines that should have been part of all the briefings and media write-ups from the Malacanang press office, because we all have been following the news, and that there is no single mention of this fertilizer program for the Philippines. This is like the error of President Bongbong Marcos in his speech in China during the state visit, where he made the mistake of citing two dates, both wrong. 1975, his visit with First Lady, which was 1974, and 1976 as the date for the official ties of the Philippines and China, when it was 1975. So we have to remind the office of the President that their flaws are being revealed to the world when they fail in providing this good staffing work for the President. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Laurel. Ms. Ana Malindog-Uy would like to add.
Yes, just quickly. Ang ating Sino-Philippine Agri Center ay located in Muñoz, Nueva Ecija, and malapit siya or very near to Central Luzon State University. So it has been in operation for the longest time now, I think. And I think it's already in phase 3. And that phase 3 was part of the discussion during the visit of President Marcos Jr. and in his bilateral discussion with the high-ranking officials of China, I think, no? Because it's part of the MOU, Agreement on the Handover Certificate of the Philippine Sino Center for Agricultural Technology, Technological Cooperation, Phase 3. So, yeah, just additional information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have many questions. We'd like to request more questions. Feel free to send. Mr. Lucio Pitlo III, watching via Zoom and via Facebook Live, he has a question for our panelists here. Sabi ni Mr. Lucio Pitlo III, himself an intellectual and geopolitics analyst, sabi niya, China is one of the biggest investors in the nickel smelting facility of our neighbor, Indonesia. Our neighbor Indonesia stopped exporting raw nickel ores in year 2020 so that they could process their nickel mineral at home and create a downstream industry. This could position Indonesia in producing electric vehicles and other important industries which uses nickel as a key component. Before President Marcos's visit, there were reports that a nickel processing facility will be among the items to be covered. Was this picked up during the state visit? Can anyone comment on this issue? Mr. Lucio Pitlo III's question. Before any one of you answered, I want to tell you I was part of the trip and I have personally met the leaders of the Philippine nickel mining industry. They were there, all the nickel miners and leaders. Can any one of you comment on this very important question of Mr. Lucio Pitlo III? Do you have any news about nickel processing? Do you agree? Would you like to remind everyone in the Philippines to compete with Indonesia?
Well, that is one aspect that was not left out by the reports from both Malacanang and, of course, the readout from the Chinese ministry. The joint venture for nickel processing in the country was one of the topics discussed.
Very good.
We don't know, of course, at what stage this discussion has reached, but that will really add great value to the production of nickel ore from the Philippines exported to China. Anything else?
Thank you. It will help industrialize the Philippines, yes. Nickel mining, yes. While you are thinking of that, there's another question here. Actually, 3 journalists sent in questions about tourism. There was an agreement signed by our Philippine Tourism Secretary, Frasco, with China Tourism Minister in front of President Bongbong Marcos and President Xi Jinping. It says here among the questions, before the pandemic, in 2019, Philippines got 1.74 million China tourists that year. Already the second highest source of tourists for the Philippines. But in our neighbor, Thailand, in the same year, 2019, they got 10 to 11 million China tourists. What are your thoughts about this new agreement signed during President Marcos' state visit between China Tourism Minister Hu Heping and Philippine Tourism Secretary Cristina Frasco in front of President Bongbong Marcos and President Xi Jinping to resume direct flights and to encourage tourist arrivals? Your thoughts about this? Any comments, please, about tourism? Yes, Mr. Aaron Jed Rabena.
Thank you, Sir Wilson. Sir, actually, with respect to tourism, every time I'm in China, so I ask several Chinese friends, why is Thailand a prime destination for many Chinese tourists? Two things they tell me. One is that the political environment in Thailand. China does not have any political dispute with Thailand, and so they see Thailand as a very China-friendly country. Second is that the tourism infrastructure of Thailand is very advanced. So I think, sir, now that we have, number one, we can address the first one, the first element that I said. We now have a relatively good political relationship with China. And second is that we have to improve, sir, our absorptive capacity, and that is by upgrading our tourism infrastructure. Because even if we continue to invite a lot of tourists, but if we don't accommodate them well here, if they don't feel convenient in here, then they would not bother to come, sir.
Yeah.
Very good
I'd
analysis.
like to add again.
Mr. Laurel, thank you.
I'd like to
Mr.
add again this aspect of in the information war. Professor Rabena earlier reported that in the intellectual circles in China, there were reactions to the negative reactions to the negative narratives circulating in the Philippines about China. That affects the tourism market. But it is,
Yes.
of course, good that the visit of President PBBM has cleared the air. The question is, after the visit, will it get polluted again by all the disinformation about China and the Philippines, about the South China Sea disputes and so on? Even in the latest survey that the American Boys reported,
Yes.
it was clear in that survey of Pulse Asia that only 2% is that concerned of the Philippine population that concerned about sovereignty issues over the South China Sea, while over 60-70% is concerned about the economy, their livelihoods, and so on. I think that is very important to remind the nation that we have to put in perspective these things. No? Tourism is one of the instant rebound programs and economic activities of the country. Instant rebound. When the tourist comes in, they spend, cash is injected into the income stream of people, down to the vendors, down to the entertainers in the bars and so on, down to the resorts in the provinces and so on. We achieved 1.8 to 1.9 million tourists, being the second in 2019 to South Korea, but coming on strong. There is no doubt we will hit 2 million, 3 million in the next year. Maybe starting middle of this year, it will start picking up. We could probably hit 3 million by 2024 and so on. The sky's the limit here, because I think the Chinese market is saturated already with these visits to Thailand. The Philippines, we should also remember, we suffer some intrinsic disadvantages. It is cheaper to travel to Laos, Cambodia, Thailand for tourism. Thailand has equally good beaches and so on, but the transportation cost of tourists to the Philippines from China or from the mainland in general will have to input the cost of crossing the seas to our tourism sites. That is already a built-in disadvantage for us. You add this negative campaign against China, that is another big disadvantage. So I hope the government of President PBBM realizes this and takes action on ensuring that this deliberate hostile media campaigns of certain sectors are put in proper control and not disproportionate influence over the impressions and images that this country creates in the Chinese market.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rabena, Mr. Laurel. Ms. Anna Malindog-Uy to comment.
Okay, I'll respond to the question of Pitlu, no? About
yes.
the nickel ore.
Yes.
I think yes. I think that issue of mineral processing was also discussed during the visit, I think, of Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos to China. In the press release coming from the office of the press secretary, they said that President Marcos invited some business investors, no, to explore investment opportunity in mineral processing. And I think nickel ore is one of our competitive mineral exports to China. And of course, we are competing with Indonesia, no, and other countries in ASEAN. But I think it was discussed. And mineral processing and battery precursor production, assembly of EVs, and manufacture of EV parts and components. And even, I think, green energy, no? And at the same time, no, investment cooperation in green development, in green technology and technological innovation, platforms and research and development. So that one, I think, was discussed, that aspect, no, in terms of how we can possibly maximize exports of our mineral resources to China, and probably some kind of investment here in terms of processing as well. But on another note, when you talk about tourism, I think this is a very important opening for the Philippines. As you can see, China is reopening at the moment, but after January 8th, in terms of border controls and restriction, COVID-19 restrictions, China will now it's now loosening up, no? So while it loosen up, in a matter of time, it will allow its nationals to travel abroad for tourism. And if you can see, the Chinese tourists have the capacity to expend money. They have the highest purchasing power in the world, I think, no? So if we can attract Chinese tourists to the country, and then I think it will help boost our tourism industry. But it's very important as well to take note of what Professor Rabena have said. We need to improve our infrastructure, tourism infrastructure. We need to be more friendly as a tourist destination. I think also when you talk about digital technology, I think we need to infuse that in our tourism industry. Because if you look at Thailand, I've been to Thailand. I've lived in Thailand for 10 years, no, as my base before I went back to the country. Thailand, when you talk about tourism, they have all the infrastructure. And in terms of even language, no, there are many Thai working in the tourism industry of Thailand who are very fluent in Chinese language too. So these are important factors, I think, that our tourism industry has to factor in if we want to attract more tourists, more Chinese tourists to the country. This is very important because it will really generate revenue for the country, and our tourism industry probably will be the top tourist destination. The Philippines will be the top tourist destination in ASEAN region. So I hope our tourism secretary will take note of all of these things. However, when you talk about all of these things, tourism, attracting tourists from China, investment from China, and even like attracting investors from China, one practical and one reality that we always have to remember as a country, and I think the Philippine government has to take note of, is the political relation of the two countries. If you look at it, in terms of tourism, there are 3 countries in ASEAN that most Chinese would go to. That's Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand. Precisely because they have very good political relations and there's not so much noise, no? And of course, because they're not party to the dispute in the South China Sea, no? But at least in here in our country, if we really want that kind of investment to come in and tourists to come in, I think we should manage the noise. When you talk about the West Philippine Sea, a little bit, we should manage it in a way that it will not affect the relationship of the two countries, because that is not the big part of the bilateral relation of the two countries. It's just a small part, though it's an important part. So I think that's what I can say, no, based on observation, based on experience, and based on my exchanges with Chinese counterparts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. very good points by Ms. Ana Malindog-Uy and Mr. Rabena and Mr. Laurel. That is a very refreshing reminder from Mr. Rabena, Mr. Laurel, and Ana Malindog-Uy na the political noise might scare away potential tourists. You're very correct. That's why pala we are lagging behind Thailand, Singapore, and ano. Mr. Benedicto and Mr. Dr. Lim, maybe you'd like a few short comments about Philippine tourism prospects. Are you excited? Do you have any suggestions just in case? How do we prepare for the possible tourism influx to ASEAN? Can we get a bigger slice of it?
Wilson, I think what Herman has said, and Ana Maria has said regarding all of this political noise, are really very true. Of course, we are saddened. In fact, I think the local, the Chinese embassy here are also saddened by the news that when the Philippines just had a very good and successful president meeting with President Xi Jinping, and with this kind of survey coming out. But then again, it is something for us really to ponder on how we can try to change the whole situation. And I agree with them that, of course, we've been losing out to Thailand, to Malaysia, to Singapore, as far as tourism is concerned. Not only in infrastructure, but because of the political noise also. I have a lot of friends from China who really skip out the Philippines because of these things also. So I think let's just repair our political, whatever misgivings with China, and let's also build up our infrastructure. I still remember that when there are a lot of Chinese tourists coming here, we're lacking of a Chinese tourist guide. I have friends of Chinese tourist guide has to work almost 24 hours a day during that time. And we really have to train more Filipinos to speak the Chinese language now. There may not be enough Filipino Chinese to act as tourist guide in the future, and maybe TESTA can come up with something of a course to train our tourists. The tourist guide will make more money than an original manager because they have so many things to do. They get the big tips if they can really have a good connection with the tourists, and also, there are also commissions that they can also get. So I think we really, at this point in time, have to start training. I think with the Chinese language now, maybe 2 or 3 years now, we can already master enough Chinese language to really train them. And of course, the Federation can also act as a medium now regarding this one. And hopefully that we, the intellectuals, understand regarding the political conflict and all of this misinformation regarding this one. And I hope that this will not happen again in the future. And tourism is really one thing that we can gain a lot now. And the normal tourists will around spend $200 to $300 per day. That's normal, no? They will sometimes spend even up to $2,000. So these are really very big income for us. And I hope that we will always make tourists as our #1 top priority. Even bigger, industry than the agriculture, or even than the investment in nickel or whatever. And this will really go to downstream, and we can really inject a lot of liquidity down to our poorest of the poor. Anyway, thank you, Wilson.
Very interesting, Dr. Lim. Thank you. Mr. Benedicto, for your comments about tourism, or your hopes or suggestion.
I think this panel has already covered what I wanted to say, but on 3 points, improve our political situation here, maybe more understanding what's happening in between our relationship between China and the Philippines, and then we need more infrastructure to accommodate more tourists. Number one, our airport is so small. So if we want to attract more, we have to improve our airport. Right now, we have one that's coming up. I hope it will not be stopped. And then the other one is, I agree with Sir Henry on language. There is a language barrier. That's why there are a lot of misunderstanding. And probably we should have more news regarding China. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sixto Benedicto, for your 3 points. And to all the panelists, you are all ideal consultants for the Tourism Secretary and for this. Thank you very much. We have additional questions from many other journalists and also from Mr. Lucio Pitlo III would like to have follow-up question about railways. Sabi ni Lucio Pitlo III, watching us via Zoom and Facebook Live, sabi niya, China is actively involved in railway projects all over the ASEAN region. It already delivered the Laos-China Railway, the first metro line also in Vietnam, in Hanoi City. And China will likely open the first high-speed railway project in Southeast Asia, which is the Jakarta to Bandung Railway next year. China is also involved, this year na, China is also involved, sabi ni Mr. Pitlo, in the East Coast Rail Link project, which may be completed by 2026. Saan itong East Coast? Sa Malaysia ba yan? East Coast project. And then sabi pa ni Mr. Pitlo, 3 railway projects were discussed between the Philippines and China in the previous administration of former President Duterte. It seems both sides, the Philippines and China, want to renegotiate and proceed with these 3 pending railway projects. Were these railway projects discussed during the state visit? Tanong ni Mr. Lucio Pitlo III. And can any one of the panelists here discuss these railway projects issues? May correction pala siya. Tama, sabi niya, the Jakarta to Bandung high-speed railway will open this year, 2023 already, as our neighbor Indonesia will be the host of the rotating ASEAN chairmanship this year. Please give your comments or recommendations on the pending 3 railway projects, very important to Philippine economic progress. With China's help, can we accelerate? Mr. Rabena will comment about it. Mr. Aaron Jed Rabena.
Thank you, Sir Wilson. To answer the question of my colleague and senior, Lucio, I think there was, I'm not very sure, sir, if there was an explicit mentioning of these railway projects. But the mere fact, sir, that we renewed our commitment to the Belt and Road Initiative, which has a lot to do with physical infrastructure or infrastructure connectivity. And I think that sends a message, sir, that China is, willing again to help us in the area of infrastructure. And in addition, sir, just a few weeks before President PBM flew to China, Ambassador Huang Xilian himself went to accompany President BBM to inaugurate the Davao-Samal bridge, railway project. Was it a bridge, ma'am, or railway project? A bridge project. Yeah. So I think this is a sign that China continues to support the Build Better More program of the Marcos administration. Yeah.
Okay, let me add something.
Sorry pala, may correction ako. Sabi ni Mr. Lucio Pitlo III, I should correctly address Mr. Rabena as Dr. Aaron Jed Rabena. He looks so young kasi like a college student, but he has a PhD. Dr. Aaron Jed Rabena, thank you for your very perceptive inputs and updates. Miss Ana Malindog-Uy, who is on her way to PhD also, by the way.
Yeah. Yes, It's like this, no? I don't think, because I've read the statements coming from both sides, no? From the Chinese side and the Philippine side. And I don't think there was really an explicit discussion when you talk about railways project that could be implemented anytime soon in the Philippines. There's none. But I think there was a discussion with regards to possible or upcoming infrastructure project that will be funded by China, may it be either through loans or grant. But in terms of amount, I think on the China side, it was not specified, but I think on our side, there was a specification as to the amount. But, well, it's in the Malacanang press release. But when you talk about, but just to explain, no, because I'm right now studying in Beijing, actually, in Peking University. So one of the area that I had a discussion with some consultants or very experts on railway projects is China is really on top when you talk about this infrastructure projects, railways, no? They have the technology, they have the funding, they have the manpower to do it. And many countries in the world, not only ASEAN, even African countries, are trying to get investment from China and for China to build railway projects in their countries, especially speed train. How do you call that? High-speed train.
High-speed railway, yes.
Yeah, because they're very good at this. At the moment, they're on top in the world. So, I mean, but this kind of railway project is embedded in what you call the Belt and Road Initiative. So it's there. In the Belt and Road Initiative, there's two things there. You have the hard infrastructure and you have the soft infrastructure, which is quite interrelated. So given, I think, that the Philippines expressed that they want to participate and they want to be part and again synergize our what you call infrastructure program vis-a-vis the Belt and Road Initiative, I think this is a signal already from both sides that on the Philippine side that we're willing, we're open, no, for any kind of infrastructure that would probably be coming from the Belt and Road Initiative of China, and at the same time, China is telling us that we're open. Let's have a negotiation and let's talk about this. And I think the Philippine government must not lose the chance to be part of the Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt and Road Initiative, I'm telling you, this is a very successful project of China. It's encompassing, and so many countries already, and also organizations across the globe is part of it, and they're benefiting from the Belt and Road Initiative project of China. And I hope the Philippines will not lose the chance, because Indonesia is capitalizing on their good relation with China, and we are very much closer. I think we are closer. I mean, in terms of historic ties, kinship, I think we're more closer to China. But we lose the chance of this kind of investment. And these are good projects for the country. This will help our national development. I think one thing that we have to understand in terms of economic development, the missing link, I think one of the missing links, is infrastructure development, both soft and hard infrastructure. And one more thing that I want to share with everyone. China is leading the 4th industrial revolution. And when you talk about 4th industrial revolution, these are quantum, big data, robotics, digital infrastructure, and all of these things. I hope we can get, and they would be able, through our good relation, we can at least attract more investment in this regard, because it will benefit our country. When you talk about technology, digitalization, artificial intelligence, big data, we need it because the world is going to that kind of direction.
Thank you.
One important thing with all of these things is political relation. We really have to maintain very good political relation with China. Everything's dependent on that. Economic and politics are very interrelated. So I think we need to take note of these things.
Thank you very much, Miss Ana Malindog-Uy. Sabi ni Mr. Lucio Pitlo III, thank you to all your answers. Sabi niya, Philippines should not be left out of the railway modernization all over ASEAN. He has directed that question also to Dr. Henry Lim Bon Liong. Sabi ng mga ibang journalists daw nag-asking, there are some critics claiming why by railway from China, the interest is a little higher daw than the interest rate daw offered by Japan for their railway. What is your comment, Dr. Henry Lim Bon Liong, being a top businessman?
Definitely, this one thing, that's why I want to point out is that this railway project is being railroaded by politics now because of the interest that a little bit higher than Japan. But we should know that we should not only look at the interest, we should look at the cost. Even if the interest is a little bit higher, but the cost, if it's lower, I think that's the most important thing. And if, other countries, like Indonesia and Malaysia, if they can live with that kind of interest, I don't think we should be, we should really refuse this kind of offer. Just one thing I would like to know, to tell everybody is that when we are at that time, the height of the COVID-19, and we cannot get any vaccines from any other countries now, not even America, whatever. And I was approached actually by General Galvez to go to China to speak with them if they can spare some COVID vaccine to us. During that time, China is already exporting the COVID vaccines to around 50 countries in the world. And I asked Dr. Galvez that, how many COVID vaccines do you want to import from China? He was telling me at least 20 million doses now. So I went to the Chinese embassy, I talked with Ambassador Huang Xilian, and I was told by Ambassador Huang Xilian to write a letter directly to the top echelon of Chinese government. And I was really surprised that after I wrote the letter, in 2 weeks' time, the Philippines were being granted 20 million doses of vaccine from China, and I think we also get a donation of another 5 million doses. And at that time, you should know that the price of vaccines are different in many countries. That's why you have to sign a non-disclosure. And if you remember that when General Galvez was being not interrogated, but was being asked by the Senate to reveal the prices of the vaccine, he cannot reveal it because of this non-disclosure. But you should know also that China is selling so many vaccines to many countries, 50 different countries. But every country, if you are not really very close to me, I'll sell you at a higher price. But if you are close to me, I'll sell you at a lower price. If you are closer to me, I'll even give you for free. So this is how China is reacting to the prices of these things, even the vaccines. But at that time, we were able to negotiate. Somehow we were able to learn how much China is selling it to Indonesia, because the regular price of vaccine during that time was around $4 or $4.50, and it's very high. Indonesia was only getting around $2. But because of our negotiations, we were given the same price as Indonesia, and we are very happy, that China is really supporting the Philippines, in spite of our irritants in the West Philippine Seas. So you should remember that if China is going to give you a railroad, not really grant, but the railroad loans for railroad, whatever, even if the interest is a little bit higher, but the cost will be lower, at the end of the day, still lower. And we should also look at the result of the railways once it's completed now, what kind of economic gains I will be getting. I understand that there's a Davao-Tagum railway that was not even started, or a Manila to Bicol projects that are also pending. Hopefully, it will not be a railway by politics again in the future, and we should try to negotiate with China. And I'm sure that if we're able to completely ease out the irritants on the West Philippine Seas, maybe we can even get a better price or even get a better, lower interest in the future. But at this even point in time, I think our interest is very competitive now compared to other Asian countries. So I hope politics will not again get into the picture. Thank you.
Very good points. Yes, thank you, Mr. Laurel.
Yeah, I feel this is very important. Yes. I think this question of the 3% interest rate of China refers to the several discussions, but particularly upon the transition government to PBBM, Undersecretary Cesar Chavez mentioned that. But that was clarified by the Department of Finance with a clear public statement that that is not correct, because the loan interest rate being cited by Cesar Chavez, Undersecretary then, in the Department of Transport, was a yen-quoted loan. And the Department of Finance, Philippine Department of Finance, explained that when this is converted, the 3%, less than 1% of Japan's loan was actually higher than 3%, while the Chinese loan was quoted in dollars. So there are some intricacies there that was not clearly explained, so the Department of Finance explanation was not properly ventilated. That is very clear. That is on record, and I can show that. So again, this was a case of disinformation and misinformation. No,
Thank you.
that's very vital, because up to now it's very prevalent, this misunderstanding that the Chinese loans interest rates are higher. That is not true. That's number one. Number two, the train projects have been mentioned by the Philippine press presentations of Malacanang. These are the Mindanao Rail first phase, the Davao to, well, I forget the details on that part, but that's the first phase of the 1,100-kilometer circumferential Mindanao Railway of the personal project of President Duterte. Then there is the Subic-Clark commuter train, and then there's the long-haul South Railroad, which is the revival of the Bicol Express. These were the talks over these projects were renewed upon the beginning of the PBBM administration, brought to Ambassador Juan Silian in a meeting, in a visit of Secretary Bautista to Ambassador Juan Silian in the first month, I think, or the second month of the PBBM administration. So these are ongoing, and so that's what we are waiting to see, further details after this return of President BBM from China. Number two, Wilson, you're the only one who joined the trip to China, and maybe you can tell us a bit more about your personal observation there in the visit.
Yes. Short lang ako, since I'm a moderator. Thank you. I was part of the business delegation, and thank you to all your very good comments about the railway projects. I was very impressed with the entire welcome. It was very grand. It showed China's giving high importance to President Bongbong Marcos and to the Philippines. We were given a grand welcome, befitting a good traditional old friend. And it was very efficient. The entire trip was very efficient, seamless. Many of the international alarming news reports about COVID wave and all this that frighten people actually is quite exaggerated. When you're there, it's almost, everything in life is almost normal. The weather was also very pleasant. We went on a tour of the historic sites. Daytime, it was very sunny. It was -5 or -8 degree in weather. But if you have warm clothes and the sun, it was very pleasant, the trip. And the meetings I saw, we were not part of the meeting if you're the business delegation, but we saw all the, they were very warm, they were very hospitable. And many of the business people on the China side expressed great interest to increase economic interaction with the Philippines. And I heard from many business people in China and some government officials, they actually want us to export more to them. Kasi for the longest time, we have always been importing everything from China. But we have to exert, may nagsabi sa akin, isang young government diplomat, sabi niya, you have to encourage your business people to sell more, especially when our leaders are very happy with your leaders. That means very favorable sila towards the Philippines. They would, tama si Dr. Henry Lim, sabi niya, even sa railway negotiation and others, if you are negotiating out within context of good friendship, baka ibigay pa nga sa'yo ng special price, friendship price, special friendship interest rate. I remember as a kid, when in the 70s, I reading the news, when there was an oil crisis in the world, China at that time was exporting oil. And I remember reading the news, President Marcos and First Lady Imelda Marcos were able to get from China to sell to the Philippines oil at friendship prices. I could not forget that. So maybe we could translate the goodwill, the diplomacy of the President Marcos into better deals economically, better terms, better, like what Dr. Lim said earlier, in the vaccine negotiation of the Philippines and China, they were not treating the Philippines just as a purely business customer. They gave the Philippines 1 million dose, 5 million libre free vaccines, when the whole Western world did not allow exports yet at that time. So, what I saw was, it was very, and also I think, I heard from some Chinese business people, they said by giving the president the first opportunity to visit China at the start of the new year, right after he was re-elected, si President Xi Jinping, and in the middle of the decisive reopening of the economy, it signals that the Philippines is an important friend of China. We should not lose out on that. We should capitalize on that and not lose the positive momentum. We have other comments here and questions from the media.
May question from me.
Yes, there's one. Yes, before.
You can ask.
Yes, I will ask this question. The question from Chinese Commercial News editor, Mr. Wesley Chua. Did the Philippines and China discuss any issues on anti-drug campaign, anti-crime cooperation during the visit? Was the controversial POGO issue mentioned or discussed? He wants to know this because Mr. Wesley Chua said he saw that the PAGCOR chairman was part of the Philippine official delegation. Can anyone here comment about the POGO issue? Was it raised? The anti-drug and anti-crime cooperation? Can anyone thank you to Mr. Wesley Chua of the oldest Chinese language newspaper in the Philippines, Chinese Commercial News. 102 years already. Dr. Aaron Jed Rabena to comment on POGO and anti-crime cooperation.
Thank you, Sir Wilson. Jed will do, sir. So on POGOs, there's actually this major misconception about our country. Many actually think that the POGOs are sanctioned by the Chinese government. These POGOs actually do not have anything to do with the Chinese government. These are private Chinese individuals and entities, and they're in the Philippines because gambling is illegal in China. And the Chinese government have repeatedly told our government, sir, at the highest levels, to shut down this industry because they've already done the same to Cambodia, sir. And the Cambodian government complied immediately. But the Philippine government during the time of President Duterte did not, believing that, these are economic gains, okay? But to the Chinese government, this destroys their moral and social fabric because people are getting indebted in China. They're squandering their money in China. So money is coming out of China, and that is not good for the Chinese society and the Chinese economy, sir. So the ball is really in our court, sir, whether or not the Marcos administration will really shut down this industry. But I think, sir, several local governments, several LGUs in our country have, opted to shut down the POGO industry. Most recent example is the government, the LGU of Pasig, under Mayor Vico Soto. And I think also Mayor Abe Binay, I think they've got fed up with the POGO, sir. But lastly, sir, on POGOs, just for clarity, there's also a distinction between legal and illegal POGOs. Legal POGOs are those that are, that they have permits, The illegal pogos clearly, do not have the necessary permits, and so I think a study needs to be done, so whether or not all the illegalities stem from these legal pogos or illegal pogos. But overall, sir, the picture right now about pogos is not so good, and it is a reputational risk to our country.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rabena. Very interesting. Dr. Anna, Miss Anna Malindog-Uy.
Okay, with regard to the issue of Pogo, based on my readings of both sides' press releases,
Yes.
I don't think it was really discussed or tackled, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And on the other hand, in terms of anti-crime cooperation between China and the Philippines, I think in the recent visit of PBBM to China, it was not really explicitly discussed. But one thing that we have to take note of, I think from what I read and monitor the news, Chinese embassy, I think, is working closely with our law enforcers or enforcement agency like PNP and others, when it comes to cooperation on anti-crime, especially transnational crimes. So that is ongoing, and I think there's established good relation between the Chinese embassy working on this issue and our law enforcement agencies. With regard to Pogo, I think I agree with Dr. Rabena. It's not sanctioned by the Chinese government. I think they don't like it. Gambling is illegal in China, and it affects their economy. And I think here in the Philippines, it's really on the side of the Philippine government. How are you gonna address it? Will you suspend it, or will you, make it like illegal, or take down all the pogos, especially the illegal ones? So the ball is on our side. It's really on our side. It's not anymore on the side of the Chinese government. But the Chinese government, I think, is trying to exert some kind of effort to tell us, to tell the Philippine government to, as much as possible, do away with it. Because in Cambodia, it was done outright, when Chinese government said, please do away with pogo. So it's on our side. And it's not good. I don't agree with pogos, may it be illegal or legal, precisely because it affects the social fabric of Philippine society. It's not just the Chinese society, but I'm much more concerned of our country, how it affects the social fabric of our country vis-a-vis if we gain some kind of economic benefits from that, but equate that with the impact on terms of social ills that it produces in the country. So that's my stand.
Thank you very much, Ms. Anna Malindog-Uy.
I want to add
Mr.
again
Laurel.
that this has been a subject of some disinformation or misinformation. Even Senate President Zubiri was carried along by this misinformation that China was blacklisting the Philippines from the tourism industry. Yeah, it was fake news, but it circulated and it became a big issue for several days. There was no blacklisting. China respects the decisions of the Philippines. But of course, the other side of the argument from President Duterte's time is that the legal pogos contribute to the taxes. There are several billions reported and several tens of billions projected to be earned from legalized pogo. And of course, there's the other side again of direct Filipino employment and multiplier effect, laundry people, restaurants, and so on, from the huge employment of Chinese pogo operators here, as well as local hires of the pogo industry. That's the other side of the picture. So I think government has to make a decision on this, based both on foreign policy issues and domestic livelihood issues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Laurel, Ms. Anna Malindog-Uy, and other panelists, Dr. Rabena also. I'd like to read a few comments before we go to maybe a few final questions. It's almost lunchtime. We will be serving lunch. Sabi ni Mr. Cesar Soberano, watching via YouTube. May sa YouTube din pala tayo. Sabi ni Mr. Cesar Soberano, good morning to all the panelists. Thank you for your good analysis. Toward BRICS, BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, and OBOR, One Belt, One Road, led by China, This will put the Philippines in the right side of history towards true economic and foreign policy independence and national progress. From Mr. Cesar Soberano. Apelido niya Soberano din, sovereignty. Also watching by Facebook Live, Mr. Kevin Bourbon. What do you think is the role of social media influencers and alternative independent media outlets in promoting better understanding between Philippines and China and promoting people-to-people exchanges? And then there's another, and si Mr. Ezekiel Karingal naman, sabi niya, if President's BBM state visit to China will usher in a new golden era or even diamond era of Philippines-China relations, he said the Philippines must do away with too much negative anti-China propaganda. This is Mr. Ezekiel Karingal. Mr. Ezekiel Karingal also added, thank you to all your very good, eloquent panelists. He said, true independence is the ability to exercise our Philippine sovereignty in choosing what side of history our nation should take. It is not taking sides, but a choice resulting from an informed decision, being able to see what's truly beneficial for the nation in a just and holistic manner, taking every stakeholders as partners for fruitful diplomatic and economic cooperation and partnership. From Mr. Ezekiel Karingal, he said, thank you to all your panelists. You should come out more often in public to voice out your views and your opinions to help the government succeed. Any comments from our panelists here?
Well,
short comments, sana, kung
yeah.
pwede.
Okay, very short. The social
yes.
media influencers like Kevin Bourbon is already familiar to me, many of the names. So they're working very hard because we have to overcome some of the natural barriers in the information system in the Philippines. So we thank all of them. In fact, the names are familiar, and they play a very important part in clarifying the truth about our Philippine-China relations, which has gone on for the past 1,000 years. So
just another pahabol, sorry,
yeah.
Mr. Laurel.
Yes.
An agriculture businessman, very happy also with the panelists here, Mr. James Pena Florida Amparo. He is president and CEO of Yobel East Research and Development Inc. and EIC International Corporation. He said he is very happy with the opening of Philippine durian exports because he is working with our durian farmers in Mindanao. He said this is only the beginning, he said.
Actually,
he's very excited.
We have heard the golden era, we have heard diamond era, but I would like to describe our Philippine-China relations, at least for this year, to be the durian era.
Durian era. Later on in the future, we should have a durian forum. Thank you very much to all. Yes. We have a question from Mr. Ado Paglinawan, book author, former diplomat, and also an analyst. Yes.
I have many questions, but let me go to the bottom line.
Yes, question.
I am hopeful because of these blooming reports, but I'm pessimistic because especially regarding foreign investments, they may not come or stay because we have the highest electricity in Asia and one of the highest in the world. What pragmatic gains did the state visit achieve insofar as reducing or pertaining to our energy costs? There seems to be a suggestion that renewable energy will lower the rates. Thank you.
Thank you very much to that very important question.
I think a very important point to be made here is, again, the national grid, state grid of China, for example, has been assisting the Philippines after the takeover of the Henry C. Jr. Group of the national grid. There is, and then of course there is the very specific discussion in China of the renewable energy project, joint project between the Philippines and China. So all these. But I just like to point out again, I misinformed and disinformed maybe, and grandstanding Philippine Senator, J.B. Ejercito, for example, I name it specifically because we have to fault our politicians for thinking that they can grandstand on an anti-China platform, which is already passé. What did J.B. Ejercito say? Well, the Chinese now own the Philippine power grid, and this is dangerous for security and so on. That is a lot of bullshit, Mr. J.B. Ejercito, who's my friend. You know that, you know. But they keep doing these things. Does it help bring electricity prices down, Mr. and Senator J.B. Ejercito? Let's be frank about this and honest. You are a liar. But why do they keep doing these things? Like Tolentino, talking about the Chinese swarms in the West Philippine Sea, when the photo that he was showing was 20 fishing boats. There was, in the November, when he was complaining about the swarm, so-called swarm, there were 6,750 boats tracked by satellite from Vietnam, including those overflowing into our territorial seas. Why never mention those things? Because you senators are always using the anti-China issue to grandstand. But that no longer works. We will make sure you will pay for this information because you're not hurting China. You are hurting our nation's economic development. So I'm sorry I have to express this because it's really frustrating when you get these politicians like Tolentino, J.B. Ejercito, spewing out lies about the Philippine-China relations.
Thank you, Mr. Laurel. And thank you to the question by Ado Paglinawan about the energy. Short answers lang kasi it's almost 12. About energy, what are updates on Philippine-China energy cooperation that might help lower our high electricity costs, please?
Oh, okay, Kado, thank you for the question and thank you for raising that important point in terms of energy. No, if you look at China, is the top when you talk about green energy or renewable energy. May it be in terms of capital, may it be in terms of technology and even manpower. No, they have all those. I'm telling you honestly, they all have those things. Now, given that, I think in the recent visit of PBBM, it was discussed, no, that, and I think there was already an MOU on that, you know, we are trying to have that kind of cooperation with China in terms of renewable energy, may it be in solar or wind or other, no, green energy technology. So I think what is important for the Philippine government is to pursue that and probably, you know, try really hard to attract this kind of technology to come into the country and investments. On the other hand, I think, I mean, Kaado raised a very important point. When you talk about attracting investors or investment in the country, especially enterprises and businesses coming from China, or not even just from China, but from outside, from different countries. Our energy rates, communication cost, even transportation costs are way higher compared to other countries in ASEAN. Take note, Indonesia has a low, 90%, I think 90% lower in terms of electricity cost. So when you talk about attracting investors, I think we need to take note of these things because investors will come. They will not come to be charity foundations. They also come here to do business and they want profit, of course, at the end of the day. But it helps our economy because it generates economic activities, it generates employment and other things. So, but we have to take note of the specific factors that attracts and makes us competitive in the international arena. And I think aside from the fact that we have, you know, good relation with China and the rest of the world, I think what we need to focus as well, and the Philippine government under the leadership of PBBM should focus on local issues, especially basic, you know, electricity, communication, transportation, and all other things. It's very important because it's a two-way thing. We can only attract more if our current situation is good as well. And, you know, learn from the experience of other countries in ASEAN. No, that's very important. Yeah, that's I think my point. No.
Thank you. We have time for maybe one last question or two. Can we request the distinguished Professor Alex Magno to Clarissa, pakiabot microphone. Ay, may tao sa likod pala nagre-raise ng hand. before si Professor Alex Magdo, somebody was raising, somebody was raising, ayan, Professor Alex Magdo, columnist sa Philippine Star and professor sa University of the Philippines, the most brilliant political analyst.
Actually, I wanted to comment kanina on the rail system. No?
Yes, please do.
Our biggest problem is not financing or packaging the deal. No? Our biggest problem is right of way. We have very weak eminent domain legislation in this country. Kaya yung EDSA, bago na-connect sa Ross Boulevard, 40 years yun ng litigation. Yung Skyway ng San Miguel, na-delay ng 4 years yun dahil sa Paco, isang poste lang sa Pandakan. Na-delay yung buong project. Yung connector road ng Metro Pacific, hindi pa sigurado kung magko-connect, no? Dahil may right-of-way issue. In the same way na yung Road 10 going to Navotas, 30 years na, hindi bukas yung kalsada dahil may isang bahay na nasa gitna. No? So, yun ang hindrance. No? But the question bugging my mind during this whole discussion was the paradox of our trade relations. No? The more we increase our trade relations, the more lopsided it will be. And durian will not solve it. No? Yung annual sale natin ng durian, isang araw lang sa Divisoria yun. No? Ang katapat nun. So how do we solve that paradox? Because that will breed social tensions and eventually articulate in the political sphere.
Very good question. Actually, Professor Alex Magdo, yan ang challenge ni President Bongbong. At the lobby of the hotel on the way out, when President Bongbong Marcos was leaving and the business delegation, ang sabi niya, we did all our work na sa gobyerno. It's now up to you, the business people, to do more deals, to sell more. Kikita naman kayo, sabi niya. So, it's a good question. What can the Philippines do to export more and not just keep on importing? Very good question by Professor Alex Magdo to all the people here.
If I may start the discussion. Number one, around 30, 40 years ago, Nike was being made here. All the major brands were being manufactured in the Philippines too, among other countries. But why did they leave? You know? Intel had a plant in Baguio. Why did it leave? Power cost, power cost, power cost. Ana gave an idea of how the comparison between Indonesian power cost and the Philippines. No? 90% lower. I keep researching it, updating it. Thailand has GDP is 520 or 550 billion dollars per year. The Philippines is around 370 despite $1 billion a year. Despite the Philippines having 30%, if I'm not mistaken, more population than Thailand. Because Thailand's energy cost is 30% lower than the Philippines. Vietnam is zooming now because its energy cost is 50% of the Philippines. Shanghai's power cost is around 48% lower than the Philippines, and so on and so on. And it is a private sector that is causing the high power rates in the country. So when PBBM says, it's up to you, the business sector, I wonder how he's going to make it work. When he appoints 3 power sector officials, ERC, BISAM, and the Department of Energy, all avoid these people. You know? So our problem is not China, because China is talking about the processing of nickel ores, which will add value to the Philippines. But what is the Philippines doing? Delaying the RCEP, the last holdout to the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Sino ba ang gago sa Senado? Stop that. Riza Hontiveros. We have to pinpoint responsibility of our so-called farcical leaders. You know, grandstanding on this. Ayaw daw nila ng RCEP because agricultural protection daw and so on and so forth. We have been harping on those same issues for 50 years. And it's time for the Filipino public to recognize what the problem is, our domestic politics.
Thank you.
Complain about it and say, why are we letting the Chinese come into the sector? It's going to be the usual circus.
Thank you. Thank you. There's another question at the back. Somebody raising his hand. Can you pakiabot yung microphone? Yes. Yes. Baka you can shout your question. Mr. Riz Raul Reyes on Business Bureau newspaper.
Sir, do you think it's high time for the President to appoint a full-time agricultural secretary? Since the situation is very messy right
Interesting
now.
question. Sabi ni Mr. Riz Raul Reyes on Business Bureau, do you agree that it's high time to appoint a full-time agriculture secretary since China is opening its doors? The biggest agri-market in the world in China. Why don't we export more now?
Okay. Let me answer first. No.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, from my vantage point, I think yes. Yeah. I think it's high time for the president, if it's to appoint a secretary of DA. Because there's so many problems in DA at the moment. Ang sibuyas daw natin is 750, is it true? Because I just came back from, no? 5 days ago out from abroad, no? So, pagdating ko dito, sabi sa akin, ang sibuyas daw mahal na. At yung violet na sibuyas ba? Na before, I mean, for the longest time, hindi ko man masyadong, pag nagluluto ako sa bahay, hindi ko nga masyadong pinapansin kasi gusto ko yung malalaki. Pero ngayon, mahal na pala. So sabi ko, oh my God, bakit naging gano'n? So I think there are a lot of problems in the agricultural sector. I think a person who will focus on it is needed. I think if only the president will be able to find someone who is really able to manage the whole agricultural sector and the DA. On the other hand, ang question ni Professor Alex Magno, by the way, is really one of the best professor I had in UP when I was taking political science in the Department of Political Science, and at the same time when I was taking my first MA in UP Diliman. Sagot niya lunch ko, mabuti na lang, sir. Dalawa na utang niya sa akin. Pero tama ang tanong ni Sir Alex Magno. Trade deficit. May trade deficit din talaga. It's not only with China, but even with the other countries. Ang challenge ng Pilipinas is how to balance the trade deficit. Kasi we import more than we export. So anong ibig sabihin nun? Ang ibig sabihin nun, probably we should look at our manufacturing sector. Kasi ang manufacturing sector, ang area where you can actually probably generate exports. And also, we should improve our agricultural sector. Modernize the agricultural sector. And I think China in some ways can help that and can help in that. And also one thing that I've learned in my economics class with Dr. Justin Lee, one of the top economists in China, because I'm taking PhD in economics at the moment, is in taking university, is we should try to look at our what you call natural endowment. No? And ano ba ang natural endowment ng Pilipinas? One of that, I think, is human capital. Pangalawa, agriculture and then tourism and manufacturing sector. We need to focus, we need to invest more in this. And I think also the politics in the Philippines and the corruption problems has to be addressed by the current administration because it affects the economic side. No? So yun yung aking sagot. Sir, thank you for that question. Very important question.
Thank you. Now, yung question ni Mr. Rizal is connected to the question of Professor Alex Magno. In relation to agriculture and agriculture department and export, I'd like to manifest to you or chismis to you. Now, I heard during the first night of President Bongbong Marcos stay in Beijing, during dinner daw, somebody or one of the high officials said, your name was mentioned. Dr. Lim Bon Liong, the President yata mentioned that you are advocating for the country to increase rice production to 300 kabans per hectare with your hybrid technology, which is China assisted. China assisted us, and you, in fact, tinakaw yata ninyo yung mga China technicians from the top hybrid expert now working for you. Can you give us short, brief update about this on China-Philippines cooperation with regards to hybrid rice technology? Short lang kasi everybody wants to eat rice now with lunch.
For the information of everybody here, You will get a free pack of rice later on.
Good news. Everyone here will get rice after our lunch.
Okay, I did not actually pirated the Chinese technician.
Sorry.
Actually, it was offered to me by
Freely offered.
the National Treasury of China, which is Professor Yan Dongping, who regrettably just passed away last year, and I was not able to go to China because of the pandemic. I was mourned with the family. But up to now, I'm still very grateful of what he's doing to us. And when I met him more than 20 years ago, he was asking me to be his first stepping stone outside of China. And China at that time, the hybrid rice technology is only limited to China because hybrid rice can only be planted in a certain degrees above the equator in temperate region. The Philippines cannot plant hybrid rice because it belongs to the tropical sector. So I was the first one to break through, to do a breakthrough, to come out with a pioneer in tropical hybrid rice. Which we later on was able to expand to many other countries.
Will there be more operation in the Philippines and China?
Yes, in fact, right now we cannot cope up with the demand. We have to increase our seed production, and I was requesting China if they can assist us or they can join venture with me to increase our seed productions for us to meet the demand of our seed.
Maybe you should go into also business of fertilizer with China to support your farmers.
Yeah, you know, agriculture is such a very vast sector, and it's very difficult to cover all of them. At one time, there were rumors, not really rumors, there was an offering regarding agriculture portfolio. And do you know that our agricultural budget now is so small that it's very difficult for you to come on with a good result in agriculture. Agriculture budget before was around 81 billion pesos a year, and it's only 1.5% of our total budget. While Thailand, the agricultural budget is around 15% of the total budget, so 10 times more now. So that's why they can really came out with enough rice, and I think right now with BBM as the agriculture secretary, he was able to increase the budget by another 50 billion or more. So hopefully, that with the president at the helm, we can come out with a good showing in agriculture in the future.
You are optimistic.
Yeah, we're optimistic. No, it's just, of course, that the president should have a good, assistance in the agricultural sector, because the president is always also busy traveling and all of these things. But I think it's good that he is the head of the agriculture department.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry, we don't have time for all the questions. We'll give your questions to the panelists because it's almost lunchtime. We will be serving lunch to all the media guests here and the panelists. We'd like to request, for your closing statement.
Thank you, Wilson, and thank you everyone for being here and for joining us in this media forum, assessing the impact of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. visit to China recently. I think this is more addressed to the Philippine government. I think the visit was very successful. There are a lot of opportunities waiting for us in the economic front, especially when you talk about Philippine-China relations. I think the next step is to follow through. Follow through. It means, work it out with the Chinese counterparts. And also, stick to the agreement. On the other hand, I think one important thing that I would like to point out and also share to the rest of the Filipino nation is our political relation with China is very important. Economic relation is very much dependent on our political relation with China. As long as we maintain good relations, we have a deepening friendship with China, our economic relation with China will flourish more. And again, it will benefit the country. We need China more than China needs us. That's a reality. So we need to take note of this. We need to be more pragmatic in our relationship with China. And I think as we have said before, we should intensify and deepen our cooperation with China on areas that there are already established cooperations. We need to explore possible areas of cooperation and broaden it more, I think. And also, when you talk about the issue of the South China Sea, we need to be more pragmatic in approach, focus on low politics, address the high politics issue like sovereignty, territorial integrity, maritime boundaries in a more pragmatic way through diplomatic negotiations, peaceful mechanism, and direct contacts with the Chinese counterparts. I think that's the pragmatic way to go for us. And I hope the so-called golden age of Philippine-China relation, which Dr. Rabena said should be, in a matter of time, would be a diamond age, it will really happen under the leadership and administration of PBBM. Thank you very much again, and have a pleasant afternoon to all.
Thank you, Ms. Ana Malindog-Uy, External Vice President of Asian Century Philippine Strategic Studies, Inc. Next, we'd like to invite Dr. Aaron Jed Rabena, Fellow of the Asia Pacific Pathways for Progress Foundation, distinguished intellectual.
Okay. Sir Wilson, thank you again po for the invitation. And my closing remarks, Professor, would be now that we have seen President Marcos, he's been to China. Hopefully, the level of our bilateral ties with China would be upgraded to one of strategic partnership. And we see that even Japan and the United States, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, President Joe Biden, they continue to engage with China. They've met with President Xi personally. And so there's no reason why President Marcos should not do the same. And so with this visit, we can see that the maintenance of a constructive relationship is moving forward. And apart from railways, this was mentioned a while ago, apart from railways and bridges, other ASEAN countries have joint industrial parks with China, like Malaysia and Singapore. And perhaps this can also be explored by both sides going forward. And lastly, of course, simultaneously, while we continue to maximize economic gains and pragmatic partnership, we also need to properly manage our disputes in the South China Sea or the West Philippine Sea, because this is a major source of mistrust between the two countries, and this mistrust spills over to the mainland Philippines. And yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rabena, for your closing statement. Next would be Mr. Herman Laurel, President of Asian Century Philippine Strategic Studies, Inc., and a nationalist intellectual. Mr. Laurel.
Yeah, there is much to be said further, but I think I would focus on ending my presentations with the call for the Philippines to be actively participating in the implementation of the Zone of Peace, Freedom, and Neutrality agreed upon by the ASEAN countries, and the Southeast Asian Nuclear-Free Treaty again agreed upon by the ASEAN countries, including the Philippines. We are not really exercising a balancing in our foreign policy. You cannot say you have a balanced foreign policy, especially with regards to China and the United States, when you have the United States at your back with guns ready, having military drills with our Philippine armed forces, and adding another 5 military bases to its list of military bases in the country. That is not a balanced foreign policy. That is not being equidistant between China and the United States. We are actually still an appendage of the U.S. Containment strategy in Asia and on China. I think we have to admit that, and we have to point that out to President PBBM. That is why I said we are going to watch his actions behind his very, very wonderful words of conciliation, of reaffirmation of the One China policy, of the independent foreign policy, and so on. Action, Mr. President, we are going to watch and see. And if it is not according to your words If you don't walk your talk, then we will have to remind you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Herman Laurel. Next, we'd like to invite industrialists, philanthropists, and newly elected President of Association for Philippine-China Understanding, APCU, Mr. Sixto Benedicto, for his closing remarks.
Yeah.
Closing statement.
Thank you, Wilson. We have to take advantage of this special relationship we had with China. Especially, it started in 1971, when the father of our present president now, opened the doors of China to the world. He sent a delegation without diplomatic relationship, official diplomatic relationship at that time, and China accepted them, welcomed them, no less than Zhou Enlai and also Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao Zedong, welcomed them. And this one led to the creation of APCU, Association of Philippine-China's Understanding. Yeah. So in 1974. So on this point, we have to take, the Chinese have a special heart for our country, especially now that President Xi Jinping, most of our Chinese people that lives here, that migrated long time ago, was a mayor of Xiamen. So it has a special advantage. We have special. President Xi Jinping has a special place. Philippines has a special place in President Xi Jinping. So, on this note, a lot of us have said a lot of things, but we really have to take advantage of this, settle our what do you call political whatsoever, and of course, we're very far away from infrastructure compared to other countries. I would like to live the day to see that I can travel in 3 major islands using a train, yeah, which I think would say that we are on the first world already. And of course, as I said, language barrier, we're hoping that we will send more students for immersion in China and vice versa. China sending students here in the Philippines to immerse with Filipinos so they will better understand each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sixto Benedicto of APCU, the president of APCU. Then, last but not the least, Dr. Henry Lim Bon Liong, president, FFCCCII, Federation of Filipino-Chinese Chambers of Commerce and Industry, Inc., for his closing statement.
Thank you so much, Wilson, for inviting us to this forum. And there have been a lot of saying about the trade imbalance in the Philippines, but of course we should also thank our OFW for trying to somehow trying to tilt the balance in favor of us by we have around 10 million OFWs over the countries. And aside from that, I think one thing that we have to do is really, if we can have around 10 million Chinese tourists in the next 5 years come to the Philippines, that will really add up to a lot of goodwill to the Philippines. And as I said, please do not let the irritants in the South China Sea or the West Philippine Seas shape us into the wrong direction, and then let's try to cultivate a good relationship with China. I don't think China will ever invade the Philippines. Let's look at China as somebody of a good neighbors and a big brother to us. And I'm sure we will get all the benefits from China. And as the president of the Filipino Science Chamber of Commerce and Industry, we would like to be a catalyst between the Chinese government and the Philippine people as we are consider ourselves Filipinos, maybe Chinese by blood, but Filipinos by heart. We were all born here, raised here, educated locally, also a product of UP, and let's hope that, you know, we have a lot of students that are at that time very political motivated, but most of them have leveled down. I still remember, our two ambassadors from China, ambassadors to China, Chito Santa Romana from De La Salle. We have Jaime Flores from Ateneo. I think we have also Eric Baculina during that time from UP. I still do not know where Eric Baculina is, but I heard that he is also very well versed in Mandarin, and maybe he's also a good resource person for an ambassadorship in the future. But then again, we will have to cherish the recent visit of BBM to China, and let us keep that high hopes, and let us try to cultivate that good will that the BBM was able to create with the Chinese leaders. Again, a very happy Three Kings, and enjoy my Doña Maria rice, and a pleasant afternoon to everybody.
Thank you once again for the closing statement of Dr. Henry Lim Bon Liong, plus advance thanks for giving all of us here free Doña Maria brand rice, which is the highest quality rice available in all the supermarkets. I've seen high quality and not very cheap also. That's why thank you very much. APCU, kailangan daw sabi ni Professor Alex Magdo, next time, pasok daw kayo sa sibuyas business. Para baka lower ang price sa sibuyas kung pinasok nyo. Yes, you have sibuyas now. Pahabol ni Professor Alex Magdo, do you sell sibuyas? Can you help solve the sibuyas problem?
You know, had I known that sibuyas will be sold at this price, isang pirasong sibuyas, 30 pesos na. Can you imagine that? Ang bigas makano lang, pero sibuyas,
maybe you're in the wrong business. Magaling si Professor Alex Magdo.
Pero kahit na paano ang kanin namin, kanin palang ulam na yan. Kahit na mahal, konting patis lang, pwede na yan.
Thank you very much. Of course, thank you to Mr. Sixto Benedicto, President of APCU. He looks quiet guy, but a lot of depth in his analysis. Thank you to Ms. Ana Malindog-Uy, who's PhD student taking university, and EBP, External Vice President of Asian Century Philippine Strategic Studies, Inc., and Dr. Aaron Jed Rabena, Asia Pacific Pathways for Progress Foundation Fellow, and Mr. Herman Tiu Laurel, President of Asian Century Philippine Strategic Studies, Inc. Yes. We'd like to make special mention of our special guest from China News Service, Mr. Chang. He's newly assigned to Manila and the Philippines. So welcome to the Philippines, and thank you for joining Pandesal Forum at 84-year-old Kamuning Bakery Cafe. Yes. We'd like to make special mention, thank you to the Manila Times newspaper, the oldest newspaper in the Philippines, for the special coverage of this Pandesal Forum, which is in cooperation with Asian Century Philippine Strategic Studies, Inc. We'd like to have a photo op tradition here at Pandesal Forum with our Pandesal.